The wildfire in August that ripped through the Hawaiian town of Lahaina was America's deadliest in 100 years. At least 99 people were killed. You may recall the pictures of people jumping into the Pacific Ocean to escape as the fire burned most of the historic town in a matter of hours. But there is an untold story about a group of firefighters who were also trapped while fighting fast-moving flames. Tonight, you will hear from those Maui County firefighters about two of the worst hours of their lives. They took a stand to save their hometown without the thing they depend on the most, water. The morning began with blue skies and winds gusting nearly 60 miles an hour.
I was just watching the ocean and watching what was happening on the ocean and just never seeing that before.
What was happening on the ocean?
It just was like froth. It was completely white. And there was like whirlwind that was sat out there for over an hour.
Like that had been whipped up?
Yeah, the winds were just nuts.
Firefighter Ina Kohler drives Engine 3. She grew up in Lahaina, the once postcard-perfect town of 13,000, tucked between the West Maui Range and sparkling Pacific. In Hawaiian, Lahaina means cruel sun. But on August 8th, it was the wind, whipped up by a hurricane 500 miles offshore that showed no mercy.
We're used to wind, but we weren't used to that kind of wind. I looked out my window and there was like a giant kiddie pool, like one of the bigger ones, flying through the air, like 100 feet up.
Freaking power line just went down.
At 6:30 that morning, a resident recorded this video after a power line fell and ignited the dry grass that covers much of Lahaina's hillside. At most, there are 17 firefighters on duty in West Maui. Kohler's crew of 4 relieved the firefighters that first responded.
We had contained it, meaning it wasn't getting any bigger. So now we were just putting water on all the hot spots to make sure that everything was fully out, just dousing everything in water.
How long were you out there?
We were probably till like 2, and then we went on some calls in the neighborhood right next door of down poles and that were leaning on houses and down lines.
Around 3 o'clock, Ina Kohler's crew was called back to the area of the morning brush fire. This is police video.
Hey, there's a propane tank.
The hillside was on fire again.
How fast was the fire moving at that point?
I couldn't tell. I could tell how fast the smoke was moving, and it was kind of like not even going up. It was just going sideways.
There's a big flame in here.
The cause of the afternoon fire is still unknown, but Mike Walker had warned Hawaiian lawmakers about the danger of overgrown grass here for 5 years.
So how much of this is native to Hawaii?
None of it.
Walker is in charge of fire protection for Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources. The type of grass he showed us is from Africa. It was brought here a century ago for cattle grazing because it grows fast even with little water.
What can you do to make sure that this isn't a tinderbox?
Well, a lot of the land right now is just unmanaged. It's either folks don't have the finances or it's not economically worth it to work the land, or they're just banking the land for future development. I think you can see what happens when we do nothing.
On August 8th, a few minutes after 3 o'clock, wind carried burning grass toward homes half a mile away.
And by the time I reported that over the radio, every structure I could see was on fire.
6'4" Kiahi Ho is based in Lahaina on Ladder 3. He mans its biggest weapon, a cannon that shoots 2,000 gallons of water a minute.
It would just blow away, you know. I could stick it right in a window and put out that room, but the whole rest of the house is on fire, and then every other house is on fire.
Then, something he'd never experienced left him stunned. The hydrants started to run dry.
It was a real low point for me because I knew that we had lost, you know, that we were going to this was going to be worse than we could imagine.
The county's Department of Water Supply told us the fire caused more than 2,000 pipe breaks, bleeding water out of the system.
It was somewhere around there that I heard that where my mom's office is, which is a long ways away from where I was, it was on fire. And then to know that it was there and to know that I was running out of water, I was like, man, it's over. Like, we're going to keep trying, but it's over.
This was the view from inside a fire truck. Black skies lit by an inferno that stretched for blocks. Firefighters didn't have the water or the crews to stop it. Residents say they never received an evacuation order. So by 4 p.m., police were racing around town to get people out.
Let's go! Hurry up! Hurry up!
At the same time, reinforcements started to arrive from other fire stations across Maui, including 26-year-old Tanner Mosier. He was with Engine 6.
Once you got into the smoke, it was like 5 feet of visibility, maybe 10 if you're lucky.
It's like a blowtorch being blown at you. The heat was just so intense.
Captain Jay Fujita has been a firefighter almost as long as Tanner Mosier's been alive. He commanded Engine 1 to take a position a few blocks beyond that wall of fire next to Mosier's crew. At 4:30, streets were clogged with the cars of residents and tourists. This was a 911 operator.
You guys need to leave. If you can't drive away, get out of the car and run.
The abandoned cars and a web of downed power lines trapped the 8 firefighters and their 2 engines.
Once we determined we were able to escape the street that we were on, we pulled a line to kind of protect ourselves from the fire.
Just to keep the fire away from you.
Yeah, but the hose burnt.
So you don't have a hose
Yeah,
and you can't get out.
yeah. Our only course of action was to shelter in place.
Inside the engines, they relied on air tanks to breathe.
And we were just conserving our air as much as possible and just sitting in our seats. We were just fixating on making it out, lasting.
So at that point, it's surviving.
It's surviving for sure. I mean, we could see metal melting in front of our eyes.
I had texted my wife. I told her I love her and to pass the message on to the rest of my family that I love them, that we're stuck and we might not be able to make it out. But it was too hot in the truck, so my phone wasn't working, so the message didn't go through.
I just remember being like, I can't give up yet. Like, I gotta do something. And so I remember looking out the window, and all of a sudden I could see Engine 1 Skeeter, Mini 1.
The Skeeter is a small fire truck like this one. Mosier jumped into it alone to see if he could clear a path for the engines to get out. Mosier says when he realized the Skeeter couldn't drive through the barricade of cars, he made the snap decision to drive over them to find help.
And so I just remember putting a 4-wheel drive, and I launched the barricade, and I kind of planed for a second, and I was like, oh, okay, I made it over. And at the end of the lot was a rock wall. So I launched over the rock wall and definitely caught some power lines. So I'll just be driving through the smoke, not seeing anything, so I'm just like driving through, dodging stuff.
His truck was damaged, but down the road he saw the lights of a police car.
I just remember leaving most of my stuff in that truck, getting out, running to the cop and just telling him like, hey, I got guys in there. They need help, they're dying. And so he's just like, hey, you can take my squad vehicle, just come back. And so I hopped in there and just started driving back into the smoke where I knew I came from, or where I remembered coming from.
As Mosier made his way back, Captain Fujita realized the fire truck was no longer offering protection.
I noticed our windshield failing. It started to fail.
Your windshield failing? What do you mean?
So the windshield is made up of 2 panes of glass with a film in the middle, and that film was, delaminating and bubbling in the windshield.
So it's melting around you?
Yeah. So we got out of the truck, and we all sheltered behind the engine. We heard like a chirping of a siren, but because of the smoke, we really couldn't see where it was coming from. But finally, we seen a police SUV show up.
It was Tanner Mosier. 7 firefighters in gear crammed inside the SUV Mosier was driving, including his captain, Mike Mullally, who was unconscious from smoke inhalation. He's on the far left in this picture, taken before the fire.
He was in the car, the SUV with the door open, and his boots were hanging, but they weren't touching the ground.
So they're just holding on to Captain?
Yeah, so all the guys that were able to reach him, they're just locked on.
With his captain's legs dangling out, Mosier says he jumped the loaded police SUV to safety.
Did Tanner Mosier save your life that day?
Yes, he saved all of our lives.
He's a young guy.
You can't teach that kind of heroism. He just had it in him.
Once clear, the firefighters performed CPR and stabilized Captain Mulally.
And then all 7 of us went back to work.
You kept fighting fires?
Yep. All the way till the next morning.
With little water, there was little they could do to save homes. So as the sun set, the firefighters' mission shifted to saving anyone they could, any way they could. Ina Kohler ditched her fire engine and used a pickup to snake through the burning debris downtown. A local, she knew every way in and out.
There were some people in their cars stuck down there not knowing which way to get out, and so I would jump in their car and I would drive their car out for them.
So everybody's trying to get out and you're going in?
Yeah.
Kohler, a mother of 2, said her family was able to escape, but like 16 other firefighters in Lahaina, she lost her home.
Did you ever think, like, why me?
No, I was like, everything else is burned down, why not my house? You know, I didn't want to be feeling like I couldn't defend, you know, the entire town. And if my house was still standing, I'd probably have even more guilt.
Once the sparkling jewel of Maui, this is Lahaina today. Its treasures now a sea of ash and charred metal. More than 2,000 homes and businesses were destroyed. Hawaii's Attorney General is investigating the cause of the afternoon fire and how the water system failed. Already in the hills above Lahaina, the flammable grass that set the stage for this disaster is growing back. Captain Jay Fujita took us to the street where his crew made its stand.
Your engine was right there?
Yeah, right there.
Those ashes in front of us are the outline of where fire consumed what was once Engine 1.
It's kind of like a grave, you know, coming back to see this. After we left, it still was hot enough and bad enough to burn the engine.
To nothing?
Yeah.
What do you think about the fight now when you look back on it?
I think we all wish we could have done more. We made it out and we're grateful, but at the same time, there's still people that didn't make it out.
Not far from where the Lahaina fire began is a line of crosses, one for each person who died. The 100th victim was identified last week. But by our count, Maui firefighters rescued at least 200 people from the flames.
A bus filled with widows of war and their children left Ukraine bound for the Austrian Alps. They'd been invited to a charity summer camp hosted by Nathan Schmidt, an American Marine who knows all too well the bereavement of war. As we first told you last fall, mountain climbing was Schmidt's path to recovery from 3 combat tours in Iraq. And so, when Vladimir Putin launched his attack on an innocent people, Schmidt offered Ukraine what seemed like an impossible hope, that in only 6 days in the Alps, he could teach grieving families to rise. The journey to an Austrian hotel ended at 3 in the morning after 45 hours on the road. So the trip already felt like a mistake to widows who packed enough skepticism to last the week. Their husbands died defending Ukraine, among the tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers killed. Time stopped for Natalia Zaremba and her 2 young boys. She told us,
I
think they still don't believe what happened. Just like me, they're still waiting for Daddy to come home from work. For Daddy to fly home, to 8-year-old Ilya and 5-year-old Andrei, who imagined mastering the air like their dad. Mikhailo Zaremba was a Navy pilot, shot down May 2022 in the unprovoked invasion of his home.
Тому він справді любив Україну.
He loved
І як
Ukraine,
результат,
so
він поклав своє життя за
he
Україну.
gave his life for Ukraine. What is your hope for this trip?
Я хочу знайти
I want to find strength for myself, to be able to bring my children up, to bring our children up.
знайти цю силу,
I want to find the strength to not let my husband down and to give our children a good future. 13 widows and 20 children had come to Austria from Mykolaiv, a city bombed by the Russians for 260 days. The bereaved families traveled 1,300 miles on faith to meet a stranger still struggling to heal from his own war.
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава Україні!
Nathan Schmidt, Naval Academy graduate, Lieutenant Colonel U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, led shouts of glory to Ukraine at the third summer camp hosted by his small charity, the Mountain Seed Foundation.
It comes from the Bible. It was, with faith the size of a mustard seed, one can move mountains. We're not a religious organization, but that faith in something bigger, that faith in self, and if you can reinforce that faith, we and you can move mountains.
What do you hope these families have when they return to Ukraine?
We teach about the significance of the rope in mountaineering. The rope signifies community. It signifies team. You're never alone on the rope. It also signifies courage. Because when you're on the rope, that means you're climbing a mountain. And courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It actually means that you are afraid and you're going to overcome that fear.
There would be plenty of fear to overcome, because ultimately this was his goal: to lead children on the last leg of a climb to the peak of Mount Kitzsteinhorn at more than 10,000 feet. The first steps to the summit began with training for the kids, ages 5 to 17. For their moms, there were daily group therapy sessions, and every day of the camp would raise the challenge for both.
We're going to trust ourselves, the main thing. We're going to trust our equipment, and we're going to trust the team that we're with.
The team of professional guides and other volunteers included Dan Kanassen. Kanassen was Schmidt's Naval Academy classmate. As a Navy SEAL in 2009, he lost his legs in Afghanistan. He's a 3-time Paralympian, but he'd never climbed since his injury. The first days of training looked dangerous, but there was always an expert on the rope.
No? Yeah, that's a little late.
One professional guide for every 4 children who eased the tension slowly for kids including 14-year-old Miroslav Kupchenkov.
Now just lean back, totally trust.
No.
Lean back.
I can't.
You can.
I can't.
You can.
I can't.
Of course you can.
Miroslav, his adult sister, and their mother, Natalia, lost Alexander Kupchenkov, a 53-year-old career soldier.
Это был человек, с которым...
Natalia told us, he was the man I wanted to spend my whole life with. He was the best at everything. Wonderful husband, wonderful dad. People loved him. Kupchenkov was hit by a Russian missile, March 2022, as he was running ammunition to his pinned-down soldiers.
Он каждый день показывал, как
Miroslav told us, every day he showed me how to be a good person, and he was always brave.
Постоянно отважным.
He would never go back, only forward.
Только вперед.
And Miroslav discovered, in repelling, going back is going forward, and terror was just one step before triumph.
That's it. There you go. Super.
As the children learned the ropes, the moms seemed to be near the end of theirs.
It will be hard for you to hear this.
They were led by clinical psychologist Amit Oren, with translation by Irina Prihochko, the charity's Ukrainian co-founder. Amit Oren is an assistant professor at the Yale School of Medicine.
The way I approach this group of people is not in looking at their trauma. It's in looking at their strengths.
And what strengths are you finding?
Capacity for love, honesty. These are the strengths that they're finding. All I do is take a flashlight, illuminate inside them, and let them see and remember who they are.
But Svetlana Milenchuk, on the left, didn't see the light. She didn't believe in breakthroughs. She brought her daughter, Miroslava, while her adult daughter stayed home. Svetlana lost her husband, Yuri, a civilian building inspector who volunteered the day after Putin invaded. Svetlana mixed homemade explosives for the troops as her husband sent text messages from the front. Svetlana told us, pictures started coming in. Good morning, darling, with a photo of a flower taken right from the trench. It was spring already, right from the trench. The photos thrilled her because Yuri had always worked too much at the expense of the family, she thought. But after the invasion, family was all he cared about. His revelation lifted their lives. Then he was dead. And her rage is almost like blindness. I became very distant and angry, and I kept all the sorrow inside. I didn't share it. Nathan Schmidt was keeping his sorrow inside when, in 2019, a friend invited him on a climbing trip. Schmidt wasn't a mountaineer, he's afraid of heights. To him, the idea sounded so difficult and frightening, it might just have the force to break his grief.
Yeah. You know, I spent the Naval Academy preparing myself for war, and and nothing can prepare yourself for war.
In 2004, Schmidt was a 24-year-old first lieutenant who dreamed of leading Marines. He landed in Fallujah on the eve of the bloodiest battle of the entire Iraq War.
2 weeks after arriving at Camp Fallujah, I lost my teacher, who was a mentor of mine at the Naval Academy.
Killed.
Yeah, the rocket struck the office. I was the second one in the room, and it was the first time I had ever seen anyone die in such a way, and it was my teacher. And that established a crack in me that had to be healed in another way that took years and years to heal. The problem was that was the first of many cracks. I lost one of our Marines that was in my unit a month later. I then had my friend lose his leg. I took over his team. A few days after that, I lost my analyst in the gun turret of our vehicle. By the end of November, the unit that I was with, which is a great unit, 3-1, was combat ineffective. We had lost over 20% of our unit, either injured or killed.
And that was his first tour. He fought in Iraq for 3 years. Who were you after that third tour?
I thought in my mind that I was the strongest. But in reality, I was the weakest. I was strong physically. I I could do as many pull-ups as you asked me to do. I could run. But I was broken. And, you know, those cracks, they take a lifetime to heal.
You spend this week doing what you can to heal these families. And I wonder how much of that is healing you.
It's huge. This program has healed me in ways I can't even describe, and I feel sometimes like it's selfish. But you're right. You're right. It works, and I'm not sure why.
Maybe it works because the children and mothers who arrived on the bus will not be the same people who return to Ukraine. No one's quite the same after scaling a wall like this. When we come back, teaching the bereaved to rise. Nathan Schmidt's week-long summer camp for bereaved Ukrainian children and their mothers began with training in the Austrian Alps. Then, serious work began, the kind of challenge that might rise to a revelation. The Hohe Tauern National Park embraces some of the highest peaks in the Austrian Alps and a feat of engineering. The Moserboden Dam would be the first big challenge for the 13 widows and their 20 children. A zip line flew them to the concrete face, where they found a steel cable to clip their harnesses to. Footholds were set across the span about 2.5 football fields wide. The children and moms literally could not fall, and yet the Moserboden Dam remained 32 stories of doubt. Natalia Zaremba did not like the measure of it. The Russians had killed her husband, the father of her 2 boys. Was this risk foolish? Why do you put them on this dam?
We put them on this dam because we want them to confront discomfort. We want them to confront their fears.
Nathan Schmidt co-founded the Mountain Seed Foundation charity. We met in the 700 square mile park where the dam, finished after World War II, is a tourist attraction for rock climbers. What makes this safe in your view?
First off, we have professional mountain guides. The second thing is all of the equipment that we have. They train throughout the week on it. They know how to use the equipment. And then particularly the little children, they are also short roped into a guide. So there's multiple layers of security for them.
And so, with all that security, the challenge was not so much under their feet as under their skin.
And here we go.
Miroslav Kupchenkov, who told us his late father never went back, always forward, was following his father's lead.
You know, in life, sometimes the thing that gets you through a difficult point is knowing that you've already done something more difficult.
What difference do you see in them when they reach the top?
The sheer look of joy on their faces.
Perfect.
It's hard to even comprehend, and we know that that will be a strong point for them when they go back to Ukraine. They will know that they've conquered this wall, and they've conquered their own fears.
fears conquered by Natalia Zaremba, who at the end of the climb was walking on air.
Yeah!
She told us she came to Austria to find strength to raise her boys alone.
Nice!
Це було щось неймовірне.
She said, "It was something incredible. As soon as I stepped on the ground, the children ran to me, hugged me. There were no flowers there, so my older son gave me a branch from a bush." You know, I see you smiling, and I suspect there hasn't been a lot of that.
Зараз нема тої радості.
I don't feel joy the way I used to.
Тому що
Wherever I am, no matter how good a time I'm having,
як би весело ми не
it's hard knowing my husband could have been with us, but he's not. And even when I smile,
ніби і сміюсь,
the
але
pain in my heart is very strong.
дуже сильний.
The pain is strong, but maybe not invincible. Natalia was listening at the meetings, and words of inspiration, like those of Navy SEAL Dan Kanasan, were getting through.
That bomb in Afghanistan took my legs, and I can't change that fact.
Бомба в Афганістані забрала мої ноги, і я не можу це змінити.
But ultimately, it has to be up to me to decide if it's going to take the rest of my life, too. Thank you all very much.
Still, for others, especially Svetlana Malinchuk, words fell short. She had told us her husband sent photos of flowers from his trench until the Russians killed him. She said, "Life is a book that you read your whole life. When my husband died, I stopped turning the pages in the book." But opening a new chapter is what clinical psychologist Amit Oren had in mind. And so she took the widows to a storybook castle where she hoped to scale the walls of Svetlana Malinchuk.
And I started to talk with her about castle walls. That we're going to see a castle where there are always very deep, tough, impenetrable walls. And that I thought that her face looked like that. That it was hard to see what's inside, like this castle. And I brought them to a wall, a side wall of the castle, where there are teeny tiny windows. And I said to them, right now, I think you're here at the bottom. And as you go up, you're able then to see 3 windows. I said, unless you open that window, you can't peer out and see the beauty around you. You're trapped. And ultimately what happened is several of the women stood there on the grass and opened up to each other. She was one of them.
It was choking you. It was choking you.
Це душило вас.
The next day, after the group session, Svetlana had been thinking.
She came up to me and said to me, it was a very painful conversation we had, and I made a decision. My anger was choking me, and I decided to let it go so I can breathe. Congratulations.
Вітаю.
You've done hard work.
Ви зробили дуже важку роботу.
I'm so happy for you.
Вона дуже
She has a long way to go, but she's understood that it's a choice at least. The few things she can control in this world is how open or closed she chooses to be in her own castle.
You know, as you talk to the mothers, none of them expected what happened in February of 2022.
The invasion.
Losing their homes, in many cases, losing their future, or at least their future being unknown. And it's one of those moments in climbing where you look all around and you don't know where you're going to put your hand, and you don't know where you're going to put your foot. You don't know if you're going to be able to stay in that position or fall. This program is meant to show them the footholds and the handholds, to fill the cracks that they have too, and then lead their children back up the mountain.
On day 5, one mountain remained. Nathan Schmidt took the first steps from a high tram station on an ascent to the peak of Mount Kitzsteinhorn. It was a steep and icy 570 feet to the ultimate test of the camp. Like the dam earlier, there was a fixed cable to hook onto, but like the dam, glancing down looked fatal, and looking up, a cold, thin glare exposed hours of struggle. We followed Schmidt's lead and remembered what he told us about the rope we were on and its 3 lessons: community, courage,
and the last thing is responsibility. And this is probably the most difficult one. And that is, when you're on the rope, you're responsible for those that are on the rope with you. When they're weak, you pull them up. When they are showing signs of fatigue, you encourage them.
Look at me, Iman. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4.
We hope that when they go home, that they build their own communities. They add people to their rope. That they encourage them to face their fears and have courage.
Courage lifted them 10,508 feet, a summit reached by everyone.
Let's go, Dan!
Including Nathan Schmidt's Naval Academy classmate Dan Kanassen on his prosthetics.
It was tough, but I'm happy to make it to the top, and it was great to do it with everyone. Seeing the kids climbing gave me a lot of inspiration to keep pushing.
Natalia Zarimba's kids pushed to the top. She had come to Austria to find strength within herself, but from the peak, she could see where that kind of strength truly comes from.
Ми будемо мати
We have something that bonds us more now, some new achievements which we experienced together and that taught us to be braver and stay together, because only together can we overcome this.
бути разом.
Our strength, she said, will be from being together.
Цьому наша сила буде.
Also among the climbers at the summit was Miroslav Kupchenkov, who told us now he could do anything.
What is your hope for them? My hope for them is that they can remember the achievement that they've had, and I also hope they can remember the stillness and the peace of these mountains. You can't hear the sounds of war here. You just close your eyes and you feel like you can fly.
Even Svetlana Malinchuk took flight, rising to the summit and at last to the high open windows of her castle.
Я кричала, откровенно говоря, просто кричала.
I was screaming. To be honest, I was simply screaming. Having breathed in full lungs of air, I was screaming with my head up toward, I don't know, God? Nature? I don't know. I was just getting rid of all the negative. Has this helped you in some small way to heal?
Я свой мешок.
Oh, well, at least I managed to open the bag of my sorrows. To open their sorrows to the sky. 5 days before, they clipped to a rope a string of broken souls. Now, they would return to the war, but this time, resurrected in strength and love and invincible hope.
Tonight, we have a story of solidarity, hope, and ultimately survival in the face of adversity. It took place more than 50 years ago, but when it was rediscovered last year, it caused a sensation. As we first told you earlier this year, it's a tale of a group of schoolboys stranded on a remote and deserted island for more than 15 months. It might remind you of the famous novel Lord of the Flies by William Golding, but as you'll see, the outcome of this real-life story could not have been more different. The story begins in 1965. Mano Totau and 5 of his friends were studying at a boarding school in Tonga, an island nation in the Pacific Ocean. Bored, rebellious, and yearning for adventure, they stole a traditional whaling boat, and with reckless abandon, they set off for Fiji. Did it have an engine?
No, no engine.
But, Mano, isn't Fiji about 500 miles from Tonga?
A little bit less.
Did you have a map or a compass?
No.
The teenagers might have been brought up on the sea, but they soon figured out they'd made a terrible mistake. On the first night, a violent storm ripped the sails from the mast and tore off the boat's rudder. For over a week, their crippled boat drifted aimlessly. 17-year-old Sione Fatau, the oldest of the group, told us they were convinced they'd die.
No food, no water. We was just drifting around by the wind. And after 8 days, we saw the island.
It was a volcanic island jutting out from the sea. As the boat neared, a wave sent it crashing into the rocky shoreline, leaving it in pieces. The exhausted teenagers struggled ashore.
The only thing we do, grabbing each other together and say a prayer. Thank you, God.
The schoolboys later discovered they drifted 100 miles from where they'd set off and had landed on the island of Utter, on maps nothing more than an uninhabited speck. It was a story so remarkable that later an Australian television crew brought the teenagers back to Utter to reenact their experience. In the film, Sione, Mano and their friends show how they survived.
They were able to salvage an oar and a piece of wire, and with this, they set out to catch what they hoped would be their first meal in 8 days.
They demonstrate how they ate the fish they caught raw and quenched their thirst by raiding the nests of seabirds, drinking their blood and their raw eggs. Any food, anything to drink.
Any food, no matter how awful it is and how dirty it is, it's a very beautiful thing to have it in that time.
When they regained enough strength, Mano and Sione told us, they climbed up to the island's forested plateau, where they found a clay pot, a machete, and chickens, all left behind by a small Tongan community that lived on Utter before being ripped from their home by slave traders a century earlier. But they told us everything changed when they finally made fire and began cooking hot meals. How did you stop it from going out?
I tell the guys, everybody have a duty for the fire. You have to take care of the fire, and you have to say prayer for that night. When get up in the morning, it's still going.
The teenage runaways showed remarkable resourcefulness, building a hut out of palm fronds, establishing a garden with bananas and beans, and setting up a roster to keep a lookout for passing ships. They even built a badminton court and a makeshift gym. They lived in harmony, they told us, most of the time. But come on, Mano, you were teenage boys. You must have had arguments.
We did, and we disagree.
They cooled off by walking to opposite sides of the island, Mano says, though sometimes things got out of hand. So if there was a fight, how did you stop it?
You smack him or something like that and tell him, shut up and cool down, sit down, listen.
There must have been times when you were depressed, when you thought that you would never see your families again.
It was hard. And I always pray God and I promise him, if you could get me back, I'll serve you the rest of my life.
For more than 50 years, the real-life story of Sione, Mano and their friends was little known outside of Tonga. Until Dutch historian and best-selling author Rutger Bregman stumbled across it on the internet. He flew across the world to meet Mano and made the story the cornerstone of his new book, Humankind, A Hopeful History.
And I just couldn't understand how this had not become, one of the most famous stories of the 20th century. I just couldn't understand it because it's just extraordinary. Six kids on an island for 50 months and they survived. How?
Like millions of others, Bregman had read the fictional tale of marooned schoolboys, Lord of the Flies, which for generations has been taught in high schools around the world.
I think we ought to have a chief to decide things.
The novel, later made into a film, is a nightmarish account of a group of British boys stranded on an uninhabited island. They divide into two competing tribes and descend into violence, culminating in mayhem and murder.
There's this really old theory in Western culture that our civilization is just a thin veneer, just a thin layer. And that when something bad happens, say there's a natural disaster or you shipwreck on an island and you have the freedom to establish your own society, that people reveal who they really are. That people deep down are just selfish.
And you're saying that basic idea underlying the novel Lord of the Flies is wrong. You're saying that would never happen?
Well, if tens of millions of children around the globe still have to read Lord of the Flies in school today, I think they also deserve to know about this one time in all world history when real kids shipwrecked on a real island, because that's a very different story.
A story of cooperation, hope, and eventually salvation. In September 1966, after 15 long months, Australian lobster fisherman Peter Warner was sailing near Atta when he spotted a burned-out patch. When he went closer, he was shocked to see a human figure.
This first figure was swimming towards us, doing the Australian crawl, as I call it. And then another 5 bodies leapt off the cliff and into the water and followed him.
They clambered aboard and told the crew how they'd run away from boarding school and ended up shipwrecked. Peter radioed to Nuku'alofa, the capital of Tonga, to check out their story.
And the operator very tearfully said, "It's true. These boys were students at this college. They've been given up for dead. Funerals have been held, and now you found them." So that was a very emotional moment for all of us.
So you knew you were going home?
Yes.
How did that feel?
Like walking through the door to heaven.
But heaven would have to wait. When they arrived back in port, they were immediately arrested.
So Peter Warner rescued you and took you back to Nuku'alofa, where everyone thought that you were dead, and then you were arrested?
Yeah, we were arrested because we stole the boat.
Peter Warner told us he paid off the owner of the stolen boat and finally sailed the runaway schoolboys back to their home island, accompanied by the Australian television crew that had flown in to film their story. They captured the teenagers' reunion with their families.
Our boys have come back.
My mom, she was swimming out before I get out the boat. I'm the first one going to the beach. And give me a hug.
Never had there been such joy.
The whole population of this little island were on the beach, hugging the boys. Parents were crying. Then the party started. 6 days of feasting.
The story has never been forgotten in these islands, but when a British newspaper published a chapter of Rutger Bregman's book last year, the tale of the Tongan teenagers went viral. 7 million people read it within days. Hollywood studios got into a bidding war for the film rights. Why were so many people all around the world surprised and captivated by your telling of the story?
Maybe we needed to hear it. Maybe especially right now, in the midst of a pandemic, is that people were looking for a story that gave them hope about a different way of living together, that a different society is possible, that it's not just violence and selfishness and greed within human nature, but that we can build on something different. Maybe that's why.
It's been 55 years since the shipwrecked schoolboys were rescued. They've never had any doubt how or why they survived.
I think the culture where we come from, we are close, really close family. We share everything. We poor, but we love each other.
The teenagers had no interest in going back to the classroom. At first, they worked for Peter Warner, who set up a fishing business in Tonga. Sione, as promised, later became a minister. He's now the head of the Church of Tonga in America. Mano trained as a chef and moved to Australia. For half a century, he and Peter Warner have been best friends. Whenever they can, they go out for a sail, forever pulled back to the Pacific Ocean, where their friendship began. Why do you guys get along so well, all these years after the rescue?
Well, I think that we feel strongly in us that we have something to helping one another on it.
Yeah. And also
teaching one another on it.
And also we have the common beliefs that got you through that trial on the island, love, compassion, justice, unity.
We both believe in the same thing.
The teenagers composed a song when they were on the island of Ata, Sio Sio Noa, seeing nothing every day. It takes Mano back to a time when they were longing for home, and before they could ever imagine that their story might have lessons for us all. A little over a week after our story aired last April, Peter Warner died in a sailing accident. He had just turned 90.